So the companies obviously didn't research these drugs thoroughly enough before they went on the market. Why do you think that is?
Well, we have to remember this went on in the 1950s. The marketing was in the 1960s, and the requirements at those days were much more lax than they are now. Sometimes wonder whether Valium could have even been licensed now, but certainly in those days, much easier to do, and it was only literally a few weeks or months from first giving it to man for it to be available on the market. So it was a very rapid development, and certainly it wasn't a thorough development.
To what extent did benzodiazepines become a huge success for Hoffmann La Roche, the drug company which first introduced them?
Well, Librium and Valium were enormously successful, and Valium actually became the most prescribed drug in the whole world.
Yes, that's so. At one point it was worldwide, and I think also in the United States by itself, it was the most widely prescribed and profitable any drug on the market.
Can you understand why they were considered almost a panacea for all kinds of life problems that people had?
Well, they were considered a panacea. It wasn't almost a panacea. They were considered a panacea. And if you look at the adverts at the time, the pharmaceutical companies were advocating their use in any sort of situation. And you know, we have this phrase, the worried well. These are people who don't have full-blown psychiatric or psychological problems. They're just concerned about things in general, usual stresses of day-to-day life, and they were being urged to take the Valium and its other compounds.
And they had advertised and paid for conferences and all sorts of things, and they had reps who used to come down round to every GP practice, give them free presents and all that. And so that they were pushed. And the doctors, of course, were very willing to have a safer drug. And they just didn't think what it might be doing, although it seemed to me it was perfectly obvious.
Can you describe in simple terms what is happening in our brains with these psychoactive drugs?
Well, the benzodiazepines enhance the actions of an important neurotransmitter, that's a chemical in the brain that normally has an inhibitory or calming effect. And so the way they work initially is very clever because they just they up this effect of calming all over the brain. So they relieve tension, they affect balance like alcohol, and they affect thinking and sensations and brain function everywhere. And then, but the body is much cleverer than people think, because it says, hey, there's a foreign body here, a thing called a benzo. I'm going to adapt to it. And so they downregulate these receptors. And in the end, the drug doesn't work anymore because they've stopped this enhancement. And so the patient starts to get withdrawal symptoms, saying, hey, I need some more of that stuff. So very often the dose has to be escalated to get the same effect. And if it isn't, people get what are withdrawal symptoms, even though they're on the same dose.
Is that common? Have you come across those suffering from withdrawal symptoms? And of course, if you are suffering withdrawal symptoms before you have stopped taking benzodiazepines, and then you want to stop taking benzodiazepines so that you can recover, you're obviously going to go through a really horrible time.
Yeah.
Torrid time while you're getting there, stopping taking benzodiazepines.
Well, it gets worse unless you do it very, very gradually. And this again, what they go to detoxes. They've got lots of detox places in America. They take you off quickly. Well, that's hopeless because it doesn't give you time to get the equilibrium to swing back. You can't do that quickly.
So we shouldn't be interfering with this evolutionary process in the brain. We do so at our peril.
I think so, yes. I'm sure so. It's taken millions of years to get such a good organ, a good instrument as we've got in our heads. And if we mess it up, it's just stupid, really.
After over 50 years, benzodiazepines are still prescribed carelessly, negligently and inappropriately. Roche discovered and launched the first, Librium, in 1960, and then ignored a grim warning about its dangers 2 years before selling Valium. Professor Leder takes up the story of the man who discovered benzodiazepines.
A man called Leo Sternbach, who was Polish, and in the 1930s he was working for Roche and was synthesizing various compounds and examining them for effect on the body and the brain. He didn't find a great deal, so he stopped working on them. And then when the Nazis came into power, Roche were taking their Jewish staff, and Leo Sternbach was Jewish, out of Europe and relocating them in the United States. So Leo Sternbach went to the United States, and looking for something to do, he picked up these compounds again and tried various substitutions in them. They were quite complex. And then eventually discovered a compound which he called metamino diazepoxide, a long name which then changed to chlordiazepoxide, and we know it better as Librium. And he established its effect in animals and then quickly in humans, and decided they had a very good tranquilizer, and it became very popular very quickly indeed.
But there was some research done on Librium even before Valium was developed in 1961 by a man called Hollister. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, yes, I knew Leo Hollister. He was, I think he's dead now, but he was concerned about Librium. Was concerned that he didn't believe it was devoid of addiction properties. And he did a study, which I suppose now we would regard as unethical, where he practically force-fed Librium to some inmates in a prison in the United States, and they became addicted, and then he stopped it. And there were major problems, major side effects. I think 1 or 2 of them actually had epileptic fits. And he warned that this was going to be a problem in the future.
And that was 1961, and they'd just been on the drugs for 2 months.
They'd been on for 2 months. This was 1961, and the paper was published in a journal called Psychopharmacology.
When did you begin to have really serious concerns that benzodiazepines were actually causing real problems for people?
The late 1970s, early 1980s. Well, I had 2 concerns. The first concern was the extent of prescription. I felt that this could not reflect definite psychiatric illness in the population. This was overprescription, and there was going to be a price to pay for that. So that was my first concern. And in fact, I wrote a paper called Benzodiazepines, Tranquilizers, the Opium of the Masses. And one of my colleagues wrote a paper called Benzodiazepine Bonanza. So our first concern was the overprescription. And then as time went on and we did further studies, it became clear that there was also dependence at therapeutic doses. And this surprised us. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And trying to get the medical profession to accept this has been really a 40-year task.
My symptoms have been a disabling sentence for 8 years now. There's painful difficulty walking and standing, severe stabbing pains with the sensation of electric currents passing around my body, head and neck pains, tremors, abdominal pain, and more. After taking Valium for a short time prescribed for Meniere's disease, an inner ear disorder, these symptoms started and have never stopped. Within 6 months, I had to stop working. It was the beginning of a real living nightmare, which came close to costing me my life, and there was nowhere to go like Professor Ashton's clinic in Newcastle.
Why did you establish your clinic dealing with benzodiazepines in the first place?
People taking the benzodiazepines, many of them by that time had taken it long term, years and years. I mean, I've seen people who've been on it for 20 years or more, and they realised that after a while the drugs didn't work anymore. And not only that, they were getting iller. And the patients that were referred to me were referred by the doctor because they said, look, there's something wrong with these drugs. I'm getting worse instead of better.
We were interested in the effects long-term of benzodiazepines, and also we were running a clinic here for people, and we were getting increasing number of referrals for people who said they could not come off the benzodiazepines because of a variety of symptoms. We discussed this and assumed that they had pushed the dose up. They hadn't. So this is how we first got the idea of normal dose iatrogenic dependence. What people said when they tried to stop was really, firstly, that their anxiety or their insomnia or their tensions came back and were worse. But also they got new symptoms, and these were particularly perceptual symptoms, as we call them, so that you got people saying that sounds were very loud, that lights were very bright, that they felt unsteady, that they had pains and ringing in the ears and things of that sort.
But in the 1980s, there was first a trickle and then a stream and finally a river of people all wanting to get off the benzodiazepines. And that's how it started. And it fell to me, because I was interested in what was causing this, that I got involved in it.
What kind of symptoms were people suffering from when they came to your clinic?
Well, all sorts of things. They were very, very anxious, all of them, and I think that's what, or most of them, put off the doctors. And they couldn't sleep, and they got nightmares and dreams, and they were jittery, and some of them had a tremor. They developed agoraphobia, social phobias, some of them paranoid, some of them very angry, sort of rage. And with sensory disturbances, so that light seemed too bright, the room walls seemed to be sloping, you know, all these sort of strange things. Some of them were afraid they were going mad. And sounds too bright, and tinnitus, their ears ringing, and all sorts of things. And in addition to that, tremors and muscle spasms, patches of numbness, muscle pains, muscle jerks, a whole host of symptoms, both physical and mental. And but I had patients who'd been told they had multiple sclerosis and were doomed for life. And you got them off the benzos and the symptoms disappeared. So, you know, it became clear it was due to the drugs.
We had one or two cases where people had epileptic fits, which you might expect, and of course that harks back to Hollister's study. But by and large, it was just this terrible hypersensitivity, and also a general feeling of being very unwell, not functioning properly.